Hey guys, we are back in the Sudeep audio tutorial. So we are continuing from where we stopped in the last time. So that was on sidechain processing. So what we discussed in the last time was how to use a sidechain gate and compressor. So we saw a couple of different applications on how to use a sidechain compressor. So we are still going to see a couple of more options on when do you use a sidechain compressor. So you can see this session here, which has, you can see there is a kick track, there is another kick track, there are a couple of kicks, and there is a snare track, there is another sampled snare track, and few toms and hi hats and overheads. So it's a common thing these days that people record drum kit in a studio. But I don't want to name the drummers, but many drummers these days go with the worst of drum kit for the recording. So there are very good drummers also. I have a lot of friends who take recording really seriously and go for a recording session with a great sounding instrument. So unless you don't have a good sounding instrument, your recording is not really going to work out. So it's a great thing that people are doing drum recordings in studios these days, but also it's a suggestion that always have the best of instruments when you go for a recording. So here you can see this is a song that I had to work, I got the opportunity to work recently for a mix, and on it you can see that there is a live snare. Listen to it. So you can notice that this is pretty much unusable in the mix. You know, it's really not having any body, not much definition, but it has a nice ring that I liked. So now what I have done is I have layered it with, there are different ways of triggering different drum samples. You can use slate triggers, or you can use manual drum replacement or drumagog or anything like that. You can also MIDI trigger stuff. So you can see here there is a sample, snare sample that I have added to this session. Now this had to be done because the drum, the snare that was actually played live was not up to the expectation. You can listen to it. This is fatter. So now what happens is that when you have a triggered signal on the thing, the same way there is a kick also, which also sounds bad, and there are two layers of triggered sampled kick on this session. But most of the time you have to use your overheads. You cannot generally like program your overheads. You need to have the dynamics, you need to have the air of the studio, you need to have the like the bleed of all the instruments coming into, just to make it more lively and natural. So you can listen to this overheads track. Now what is happening is that the cymbals are fine, the hi-hats are okay, the overall like the live element of it is good, but the snare that I am not liking is also present on the overhead tracks, which we cannot remove it by editing. Why? Because there is a hi-hat tail and a cymbal tail on it, nor you can compress it directly, because it would just start compressing your cymbal transients as well. So now what I am going to do is, again we are going to use sidechain compression as a technique here to get down your snare on your overhead track. So you can see here when I play all of these together, the whole drum kit, without the live snare, with the sampled kick and the sampled snare in it. So if I want to push some more of my overheads, that means I want to make it a little more lively depending on the song that you're working on. So you can notice that your live snare starts poking up, and in fact starts phase cancelling with your sampled snare. So I'm going to push this up, you can listen to this. Now, if you do not want that snare quality at all, but you still want to retain everything from your overhead track, what you can do is again insert a compressor that has a sidechain input. So, you can see here again I am using a C1 comp in this case. So, the sidechain input is the snare sidechain, which you are sending from the snare sample track at unity level. So, this is the snare sidechain aux path, which is going bus path, which is going from the sample snare, and that is triggering the dynamics of the overhead track. So, you can see here when the track is playing, only when the snare comes in, there is compression happening on the track. So, there is about 12 to 15 dB of compression happening only when the snare is playing. So, the result is that you are able to duck the live snare from the overhead track through sidechain compression. So, without the compression, you will be able to hear the snare coming out, the live snare, which we do not want, and with compression you will be able to control it up to an extent. So, you can notice that the snare tends to get tighter when the compressor is on. Why? Because the sample, the live snare is being ducked down with sidechain compression. We will also see one other example of a sidechain processing on a vocal track, especially when you use reverbs, long reverb tails. So, you can see there is a vocal track and there is a reverb track. And what I am doing here is I am bypassing the compression that is already there on it. So, let us listen without the compression. What you will notice is that the reverb gets really loud when the artist sings a loud portion.
साईं की नगरी साईं की नगरी परम अति सुंदर.
So, what you can notice here is that when the artist is singing these loud sections, which are these, the reverb is actually overpowering beyond the dry signal, which we want to control it. Like a old school technique to control it was automating the return channel and to get it in place. But there is an easy way to do it, again through sidechain processing. So, you can see here on the reverb track, before it hits the reverb, you can see there is a compressor that has been applied with the vocal channel as the trigger signal onto the compressor. So, it is not compressing the signal that is coming into, but we are choosing directly the vocal track over here. So, the result being, you can notice that I put the compressor on. You can notice when the artist is singing the louder sections, compression would be happening first and then it goes into the reverb. As a result, you will not be having very audible reverbs in the loud sections, but when the tail comes in, the reverb gets audible.
साईं की नगरी साईं की नगरी परम अति सुंदर अति सुंदर.
So, you can notice here when the artist is singing the louder sections, the reverb really does not show up. So, once it goes down in level, it gives a nice long tail to it. So, all that we have done is, you can see on the mix window, we have a compressor with vocal as the sidechain input, and the compressor comes first, then there is a small EQ, the EQ to the signal, and then you have a reverb that is there with a about 5 seconds reverb tail. So, the result is that at the loud sections you do not have much audible reverb. You can also do this without a sidechain feature also, you can do it just with a compressor. But the problem is that sometimes you tend to automate your vocal track up and down, and the reverb sensor generally post fader. So, what happens is that the threshold of the compressor is not floating. So, it sometimes over compresses the signal when you do automations out here. So, that is why I am choosing a sidechain input as the for the compressor the compressed signal. So, once it is compressed, it is going into the reverb. So, this really helps, this sort of a technique really helps to get your reverbs in place in the mix without projecting it too much in the loud portions. So, I hope these few examples really helped you. Keep watching more episodes in Sudeep Audio. Thanks for watching. This is JK.